we did see was the one-day or half-day course, sometimes covering a range of issues or covering an individual issue. What we looked at in both surveys was we asked respondents to tell us the key components of their training. And what we saw was, would be fair to say, there were an aspect of kind of opportunistic training being made available. If we have a commercial system where people have to buy training, they need a hook in which to encourage people to come along to the training. So back in 2009, we saw a fair bit of EAL and ICT training being advertised and attended. Because at that time, everyone thought that ICT was, Google Translate would just, there would be no need for EAL specialists if everyone had done efficient ICT. Now, obviously, we saw an increase in training about grammar because of the new testing regime in terms of grammar. So in 2009, there were no courses that specifically aimed to look at EAL and grammar. By this time, there was significant numbers. So it appears as if EAL training is kind of a barometer about to see what's hot in terms of the EAL, of the educational landscape. SEN was a perennial issue, the overlap between EAL and special educational needs. It was an issue in our first survey and more so in this survey, suggesting that to some extent the training that's popular is something that that pulls in staff, but was also where kind of the key points may lie. We know, I think, from various audits that have been done about EAL staff, that quite often over the intervening years, and certainly since 2004, those two roles have become intertwined in lots of academies and schools and academies. What we also saw within the training was an increase in off-the-shelf training, which were trainings that were made commercially available and which were advertised as being helpful to teachers of EAL learners. The content itself had limited EAL-ness about it. However, it was marketed at helping teachers of EAL bilingual children. The unmet demand for EAL training and CPD. What the participant survey was fascinating in terms of saying gathering an idea of what it actually was that people thought they needed. So a lot of participants who responded to the survey said, yeah, this was fine, but. Okay, so I knew all this, but. Far too general. Not relevant to the level of our EAL students. Someone else wrote that they were trying to find something for working one-to-one with EAL pupils aged 5 to 9. You can see that they've got a very specific job and they want to know how to do it, and they were finding it really, really difficult. Well, unsurprisingly. We had responses saying we need more frequent, meaningful training for experienced EAL coordinators, as there is nothing to drive our professional development further. The need for coordinator training was something that came out absolutely clearly in the 2009 audit, but which, through the 5-year TDA programme, actually wasn't provided for. Professional associations such as NALDIC has been taking up some of the slack of that. However, that's far from saying we've got a national system. So there is something from participants, even those who are keen to develop their professional expertise, to say, okay, I've had a bit of basics, I know something about EAL, I don't want to sit in a classroom where people are talking to me about EFL, about systems that have been developed for other countries, or about general English. What I want is something to help me with the learners, bilingual learners in my situation, and that the current offering doesn't makes that not available, particularly because the EAL training is so limited in time and scope. Okay, so we can have a quick look there at the kind of things that people considered to be EAL training. as you can see, grammar rising up the charts. And for example, talking partners. Many people consider that to be an EAL training. And those of you who are familiar with talking partners will know it's about oracy, and it was trialled in multilingual areas. So it's, you know, there's a usefulness for bilingual learners, but it's, you know, to be regarded as EAL training. New arrivals remains a high concern amongst people taking up training, but it also, some of the comments again from participants said most of the training was about new arrivals. I don't want to know about new arrivals, I want to know about children who are more advanced. Frightening statistics, 31% was over a term, 12% only was accredited. Lack of courses. There were some accredited courses, but what we found in this audit and in the previous audit was that there were endless numbers of names and credit levels, and it was confusing for our participants to be able to find out, you know, what was what, because there was no standard even across the HEIs about what was being offered, what its name was, and there was no curriculum reference. One of the issues around the multiplicity of providers is that it's becoming increasingly difficult to track down what is being offered. So, for example, although most HEIs will publish details of their courses on the web, very few local authority courses were actually publicly accessible outside of their own regions. Similarly, private providers, they usually came up if you Googled EAL training. So, you know, whereas we have to think about if that's going to be a major route for people looking to embark on professional development, what are those rankings saying about, and the sponsored link about, so what are people in schools most likely to come up with when they Google EAL training help? There were some courses for teaching assistants and HLTAs. Again, they had different content, different certificate levels. And there was a lack of consistency and a lack of parity and a lack of clarity really about what courses contained. What courses contained, who they were intended for, and what their credit level was. That led us to acknowledge that there are significant barriers to schools finding out about the quality and the applicability of EAL courses, and the varying credit levels are confusing for potential participants. The NALDIC recommendations were born out from the findings of the audit. It's been a long-standing NALDIC aim to have a more systematic system for teacher training, from both that works up from initial to more advanced and specialised EAL professional development. I know a number of us in this room will have done lots of different framework development to support various organisations to establish that. However, it ain't there still. It's clear from the report, from the audit, is that we need a differentiated training. We can't expect single levels of training to actually help all our staff in schools. That we need to be looking both at the language learning needs and the diverse contexts of learning. If we look at, despite the fact that the EAL population is growing nationally, contexts are not equivalent in Herefordshire and in London. They are miles apart. So it's not going to be a one size for those settings. We need wider availability of and access to training for teachers and other educational practitioners, and we need opportunities for accredited training, because clearly came out of the participants report. We can no longer expect to have a framework for a career framework, which is going to be centrally imposed from central government. But what we can make available, if we make training available, is an encouragement to teachers to develop their professional specialism in EAL. And within the kind of marketised context of education, those of us who are interested in EAL and teacher development need to call for greater scrutiny of the content and quality of training programmes. Because it is a market, and we can't necessarily rely on the fact that self-advertising claims are going to be helpful to people when they're choosing their training. So what would be useful is a greater discussion around that within those who are already within the EAL specialist field. Okay. And I think that's